I was born in Springfield, Missouri, in a suburb that at first glance seemed like the perfect backdrop for a commercial. Symmetrical lawns, neat white fences, smiling neighbors who waved at you every morning, as if they were practicing politeness in front of a mirror. No one raised their voices in the street here, and even the children who were kicking soccer balls on the asphalt did it in a homely way, almost in a whisper. But behind the door of number 22 Willow Lane, behind tinted shutters and hydrangeas along the porch, there was a world that had nothing to do with this deceptive exterior. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. My mother, Julianne, was the kind of woman who was probably called the prom queen in her youth. Tall, restrainedly elegant, always with perfect makeup, even at 7 in the morning. People admired her. "What a beautiful mom you have," classmates whispered to me, peering into her car windows as she picked me up from school. But behind her smile, polite and measured like the turn of a checkbook, there was ice. She didn't laugh, sing, or tell fairy tales in the house. She commanded, regulated, and analyzed. Everything had to be under control. Every word, every gesture. And me. I was just a part of this entourage, an accidental element in her ideal life project, which seemed to have failed too soon. My father left when I was not even 5. I remember it vaguely, the smell of menthol cigarettes and the rough palm I clutched when I was afraid of monsters under the bed. He left several postcards with views of New York and Las Vegas, and one sent an old stuffed monkey whose paw was torn off. "Never keep what's broken," Mom said then, snatching it out of my hands and throwing it in the trash. I remember crying for a long time that night, hiding under the kitchen table. 2 years later, Julianne got married again. Richard was a gentleman with kind eyes and a tired voice. He disliked conflict and preferred to agree rather than argue. For me, he became an island of silence in a stormy sea of maternal demands. Sometimes he would put a nut bar in my lunchbox, knowing that I loved this one, or pat me on the shoulder in the morning when I was tying my shoelaces. He never said, "I'm proud of you," but it was in his eyes. And then Haley showed up. A small pink bundle with eyes that looked like they were copied from Julianne. The day she was brought home from the hospital, everything changed. The room in which I painted became a nursery. The books on the shelves were replaced by teddy bears. My school certificates disappeared from the refrigerator, giving way to ultrasound scans and my first tooth. "You're a big girl, Savannah, give in to the baby," Mom repeated like a mantra. And I gave in. And the toys, and the attention, and the scariest thing is the place in her heart. I've learned to be invisible. At school, I sat at the last desk without raising my hand, even if I knew the answer. I came home quietly, taking off my shoes at the door so that the boards wouldn't creak. In the evenings, I hid in the library, piled up with textbooks on literature and biology. I learned how to play an old guitar that someone once left in the school basement. I didn't need admiration, I wanted at least someone to see that I am. But even that was in vain. "Mom, listen to what I've learned," I tried once, clutching the guitar to my chest. Later, Savannah. "I have a headache, and Haley needs to sleep," she snapped, not even looking up from her laptop. I played anyway. Quietly, almost in a whisper, so as not to disturb. In every note there is a hope that maybe she will hear. What will happen? That he would smile. But she never turned around. The holidays were especially difficult. At Christmas, Julianne arranged the perfect photo shoot by the fireplace. Haley was wearing a sequined dress, and her hair was neatly curled. And I'm wearing a sweater a size too big, with a braid braided in a hurry. "Savannah, stand a little to the left." "No, it's not like that." "Keep your back." "Well, you've ruined the shot again." I knew I should be grateful. I had a house. Shelter. Study. But every day, an emptiness grew inside me. She hid between the lines of her school essays, in the pauses between words at dinner, in the sound of the bedroom door closing. Sometimes Richard tried to interfere. "Maybe you're going overboard with her?" He spoke carefully. "You don't understand. Savannah is stubborn. She's doing everything for evil," Mom would say, not letting him finish. He lowered his eyes. I knew he was afraid. "More to lose your peace than me." So the years went by. I learned to be strong without support. To rejoice without approval. Building walls so I don't have to hear people compare me to Haley. Look at your sister. Is it so hard to just be normal? One day I really tried to become normal. I came home with my hair straightened and wearing a dress I borrowed from a classmate. Mom nodded, coldly. "You finally look like a girl." And then, smiling at Haley, she added, "But you're still a long way from being a sister." That night, I took off my dress and put it in a bag. In the morning, I returned it to my classmate without saying a word. I didn't try anymore. I became a shadow, but a shadow with a dream. The dream that one day I will leave this house. That there's a world beyond Willow Lane where no one measures your worth by comparison. Where you can be heard, even if you don't scream. Where you can play the guitar and someone will really want to listen. There, behind other people's windows, I knew my real life was beginning. I just had to wait for the day when I could go out there. For most, high school is a time of self-determination, freedom, first love, and daring dreams about the future. For me, it has become an arena. A loud, buzzing arena full of lights and ridicule, where I went out every day to prove to myself and, perhaps, to someone else that I exist not only in the shadows. I studied well, even very well. Mathematics was easy to learn, literature carried you away like a hurricane, biology fascinated you with its logic. But these were achievements that had no weight outside of school classrooms. Excellent grades are good, Savannah, but you could at least put a little effort into your appearance. Mom stood at the kitchen sink with her arms crossed over her chest. She was wearing a monogrammed bathrobe, her hair was neatly tied up in a bun, and her face was flawless, like a TV presenter from a morning show. I was standing by the refrigerator, with a box of juice in my hands and with the same expression on my face as always in her presence, flat, impenetrable. "I don't understand why you should be someone else when you can be yourself," I muttered, avoiding her gaze. She laughed shortly and jerkily, as if she had heard a silly joke. "Being yourself is not a strategy, Savannah. People love it when it's nice to watch. Look at Haley. She knows how to present herself. You could learn from her." Haley really was perfect. By this time, she already occupied the first chair in the cheerleading team, her photos decorated yearbooks, and her smile decorated posters of school events. She wore jeans like she was on the cover of a magazine, and she could laugh so hard that people fell in love. I wore simple t-shirts, sometimes plaid shirts, and painted my nails a deep blue, which my mother called depressing. We lived in the same house, but it seemed like we were in parallel universes. I didn't envy her. Truth. But I felt the emptiness growing between us every day, as if someone had carved a bridge between the two shores and left only the water, cold and indifferent. Each of her successes highlighted my irrelevance. I wasn't a star. I was a spectator. And yet, Jacob appeared in this sea of monotony. He was tall, slightly stooped, with notebooks in scattered folders and an eternal coffee cup in his hands. He was sitting behind me in biology, and one day he leaned forward to ask me what I was recording lectures with. We started talking. At first it was short phrases, then an exchange of playlists, then joint trips to the school library. "Do you really listen to Radiohead?" he asked one day when I gave him an earpiece. "They're my survival soundtracks," I replied, and he smiled as if he understood. He was the first one who came to my performance at the school music club. He was sitting in the front row, awkwardly, but with sincere attention. Then he came up and said that my voice was like the autumn wind. I laughed, and then, for some reason, I burst into tears at home. We didn't say we were dating. We were just together. He held my hand in the hallway, brought me donuts before first period, and we chatted about movies until dark. It was a new feeling to be someone's. To be seen. And then one day, for a school science project, he came to my house. I was nervous. I put on a clean shirt, pulled my hair back into a ponytail, and even carefully wiped the lenses of my glasses. When he came in, I saw my mother appraising him with her eyes. Politely, but too attentively. "So you're Jacob, right?" she asked, offering her hand. "Yes, ma'am." "Nice to meet you," he replied with the same smile that I was already beginning to recognize as my favorite. Dinner was held in silence. I tried not to look at her, but I could feel her attention, her prepared phrases. She started innocently. "Savannah is a little messy in her room. Don't be surprised if you see a mess." Blushed. "No, it's okay," he muttered. "It happens to everyone. And, of course, she has specific interests. Just imagine, she wants to study philosophy. Imagine, Jacob, how much can you earn by thinking about the meaning of life?" I gritted my teeth, lowering my eyes. And then there was the climax. "Haley, honey, show Jacob the photo album from the camp. Do you remember that year where you won the title of Miss Sunny Smile?" Haley jumped up eagerly, as if waiting for an invitation, and held out the album, opening it to a page where she was in a bright swimsuit with a wreath on her head. Jacob smiled politely and said something, but his attention had already been redirected. I felt the stage slipping away from under my feet. My scene. Our moment. When he left, I sat on the stairs for a long time, pressing my hands to my cheeks. Richard walked past, stopped, wanted to say something, but just nodded and walked on. He also had his own lessons in silence. A week later, Jacob came up to me after school. "Savannah. You're wonderful, really. I just think we should stay friends. I hope you don't mind." I nodded. Sure. What else could have been done? I smiled so that he wouldn't see another part of me breaking down. When he left, I didn't cry. I just sat by the window and watched the rain run down the glass for a long time. It was almost beautiful. That day, I learned one of the hardest lessons. In a house where you are taught to be silent, even love comes and goes without noise. When I turned 18, I didn't blow out the candles on the cake or make a wish. My desires were too specific to be entrusted to the air. I wanted to leave. Not just to leave, but to escape, to dissolve into a new space in which my name will not be called to the board with an intonation of reproach, in which I will be able to be not Julianne's daughter, not Haley's older sister, but someone whose I will be enough. I applied to the university in Fort Collins, Colorado, because on the map it was as far away from Missouri as possible, from home, where the air seemed glassy and fragile, where the footsteps were too loud, even if you walked on tiptoe. When the letter of enrollment arrived, I was not jumping for joy. I just sat on the bed, holding it in my hands, and looked at the university seal as if it were a passport to another dimension. Dishes rattled in the kitchen as Mom cut vegetables for salad, as if chopping bridges. I came in with a letter in my hand. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was accepted. I'm going to Fort Collins." She didn't turn around right away. She just froze for a moment, as if analyzing what she had heard. "So far away," she said, slicing carrots. "Well, yes, I see. You're always running away." I didn't answer. There was everything in that phrase: her habitual resentment, passive aggression, and, most surprisingly, a glimmer of fear. But I didn't allow myself to doubt. I knew that if I stayed, would disappear completely. Fort Collins met me in the fall. The air was different, cold, but free, filled with the smell of pine needles and wet stone. The dorm room was tiny, but it had a large window with a view of the mountains. I sat on the windowsill for a long time, listening to the wind touching the glass, and thought, this is my silence. The one that doesn't push, but hugs. It was different at the university. No one knew who my mom was, no one compared me to Haley. I was just Savannah. A girl with a notebook, writing strange poems between lectures, who loves coffee with cinnamon and books with wrinkled pages. I made friends, for the first time in my life, friends who called not to borrow notes, but just to see how I was doing. In my sophomore year, I met Andrew. He was sitting on the steps of the library, reading a graphic novel and eating an apple, as if the whole world was his living room. He looked up as I passed by and said, "The heroine of this book would suit you. Just more thoughtful." I stopped. "Why?" "You have that look in your eyes. It's like you talk to yourself more often than you talk to people." I laughed. And for the first time, it wasn't a restrained laugh, but a real, loud, liberating one. Andrew studied software engineering, wore hoodies with faded logos, and joked in a way that made you think first and then laugh. We were different. I'm all words and feelings, he's all numbers and irony. But, apparently, opposites not only attract, they treat each other. I didn't let him get close for a long time. It seemed to me that any intimacy was a ticket to betrayal. I didn't know how to be loved without expecting a stab in the back. He didn't rush it. I didn't ask any questions. He was just there. "You disappear sometimes," he said one day, when I hadn't left my room for 3 days in a row, which was littered with textbooks and old letters from my father. "I'm scared," I confessed. "What if you decide I'm not enough, too? Is she good?" He looked at me as if he wanted to read between the lines everything I'd ever been unable to say out loud. "You don't have to be good, Savannah. You just have to be yourself. And believe me, that's a lot more than I've ever asked for." These words broke something long compressed in me. I'm used to the fact that love needs to be earned, suffered, earned. And he just offered her, like a warm blanket on a cold evening, like a quiet song against the background of the rain. We started living together in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a house with a creaking staircase. It was modest, but cozy. We cooked breakfast together. He fried eggs, I brewed coffee. On weekends, we watched movies on our laptop, confusing and funny, sometimes ones where I cried and he held my hand without saying anything. There was a map of the world on the kitchen wall, on which we pasted stickers with the names of places we wanted to go. We dreamed a lot, vividly, greedily. In those dreams, I was no longer alone. And so, one evening in late autumn, when it was raining tirelessly and the room smelled of apple pie, he took out a small box. Just like that, without pathos, without speeches. He sat down next to me, handed it to me and said, "I do not know where life will lead us. But if there's anyone to fight uncertainty with, it's you. Will you marry me?" I looked at him, at his warm eyes, at his fingers nervously tugging at the edge of his sleeve, and I knew it was true. This is for real. I nodded, unable to say a word. Because at that moment, everything I felt was more than any phrases could contain. And finally, I realized that the road to myself is not a single path. This is a journey in which you first lose everything that has been imposed on you and find what really belongs to you. And sometimes, if you're lucky, along the way you meet someone who holds your hand while you relearn how to be yourself. I always knew that this moment would come one day, no matter how long I delayed. The question is not whether we will go home, but when the walls of the past will close over me again. Andrew, with his kindness and insistent faith in the best, said then almost in a military way, "You are not alone anymore. We are a team. And we'll do it together." I nodded, trying to force a smile, but fear was growing inside me, not for myself, but for him. For having to see what was really hidden behind the facade of the house with the white curtains on Willow Lane. We went to Springfield for the weekend. Familiar landscapes flashed by outside the car window, like fragments of a dream you were trying to escape from. I stared out the window and didn't say a word most of the morning. He kept my hand on the gearbox and sometimes stroked it with his thumb, as if with this gesture he could remove everything that I did not have time to tell in words. The house greeted us with silence, but the performance was already starting inside. My mother, as always, is in character. Juliana was wearing a light sweater, her hair was styled, and her smile was so wide that it seemed painted on. She opened the door as if we were guests on her talk show. "Savannah, dear. And you must be Andrew," she said with an accent on "you." "What a handsome young man. Come on in, make yourself comfortable. We have everything ready." I felt a cold sweat slide down my back. Her voice, her intonation, everything was too familiar, too precise. I learned a game whose rules I had not accepted for a long time, but which I was drawn into again. The dinner was a product of subtle, poisonous manipulation. Everything was nice at first. She asked Andrew about his work, about his parents, and gave him exquisite compliments. But then the real performance began. "Savannah has always been a special girl," Mom said with exaggerated tenderness, pouring wine. "A little distracted, a little strange. Well, you've already noticed, haven't you?" I stared at my plate, feeling an inner heat burn my cheeks. Andrew turned to me and lightly touched my knee under the table, as if to say, "I'm here. I'm Mir." Haley walked into the dining room as if she had stepped out of a fashion magazine, a sequin dress, red lips, and perfectly curled hair. Her eyes darted to Andrew, appraisingly, with a squint. "Here's our star," Mom announced proudly. "Haley, honey, meet your sister's fiancé." Haley smiled. That smile was brilliant but icy. She came over, held out her hand to Andrew, and said, "I hope you're not too upset to learn that Savannah can't cook. Although, surely you're doing great on your own?" Andrew smiled politely, but I saw his lips tighten. "We cook together. It's fun," he replied calmly. Mom chuckled. "Ah, the romance. Fine. Although, you know, Andrew, a real housewife always knows how to feed a man. I hope Savannah can at least boil eggs." I didn't eat any more. I just sat there and stared at the plate, as if it were a scene from a movie in which I was playing a cameo role again. The banter continued about my extravagant clothes, my alleged inability to get along with people, and my choice of profession. When we got home, I was devastated. But Andrew was calm. He hugged me and said, "Your family is only part of your story. But it's not you. And certainly not us." I nodded, but I didn't say that I loved him even more in that moment. For staying. A few days later, when I returned from a lecture, Andrew was sitting on the couch, pale, phone in hand. "One of yours," he began, looking at the screen. "Your mom." I froze. What did she say? He took a deep breath, as if diving underwater. "She found my number. I called at work. First she congratulated me, and then?" I asked, feeling my heart tighten. "Then she started saying that you weren't ready for a serious relationship. That you're stubborn, distant." "What? Haley is a more suitable option." "Seriously." She said I should take a closer look at Haley because she knows how to build relationships. I covered my face with my hands. I was ashamed. I'm ashamed for her, for myself, for the fact that this is happening again. I began, but he interrupted me. "Hey, no. Not you. Don't say I. It's not you. This is her. I didn't know that adults could be like that. I don't even know what to call it. But believe me, I know who you are. And I'm not here to choose. I have already chosen." I nodded, unable to speak. Tears rolled down my cheeks, and I let them flow. Because, perhaps for the first time in my life, I realized that I was not alone under this roof. Even if the roof is old, covered with the mold of the past, there was someone next to me who held my hand. And that was enough to resist. I didn't know what real rage was until I heard how my mother, the woman who was supposed to protect me from the world, offered my fiancé to exchange me for my sister. It wasn't just painful, it was like a bite of cold metal, like a blow that splits not only bones, but also the entire inner architecture of the soul. At first, I wanted to disappear. Then, to scream. And then came the icy clarity. I won't be a victim anymore. No whispers behind my back, no venomous smiles at dinner. It's time to tell the truth. And not just to say it, but to show it. Andrew, my unbroken Andrew, suggested what at first seemed like madness. We'll record it. We won't let her play in the shadows anymore. If she's so sure she's right, let everyone hear. Are you sure? I asked. It can destroy everything. Savannah, he took my hands in his. Everything that is built on lies must be destroyed. And all that is true will endure. That's how our little conspiracy was born. We named it the Avalon Plan, after the mythical island where kings were taken after battles. A place of truth and healing. It wasn't just a plan, it was a rite of passage, a path out of the swamp of doubt into the light of clarity. We made an appointment. Andrew called Julianne and pretended to think about her words. He spoke softly, pliantly, like an actor playing a role in a play he had written himself. You're right, Mrs. Moore, he said, his voice trembling as if in doubt. I don't want to make a mistake. Maybe we should meet and discuss everything. My mother, as I expected, immediately agreed. Her voice poured over the phone like sweet poison. She made an appointment at the cafe where we used to have breakfast on Saturdays. How symbolic. On the day of the meeting, I was sitting in a corner booth of that cafe, hiding behind glasses and a baseball cap. My knees were shaking under the table. I didn't know if I could stand hearing her talk about me again, as if I were a thing with a marriage that could be exchanged for a new model. But I had to hear it. Not just for myself, but for everyone who stayed silent for years when Julianne dictated the rules. Andrew came in on time, sat down at a table and put the phone with the recording turned on in his jacket pocket. I could see her leaning towards him, her face lighting up with a victorious smile. Well, darling, I knew you were sensible. Savannah, she's a good girl, but... She lowered her voice, but I could still hear her. She's not for the family. Haley is a completely different matter. She knows how to behave. She has potential. I bit my lip until it bled. It wasn't pain, it was payback. The recording lasted 12 minutes. 12 minutes of truth. When Andrew came out, he was pale but determined. He nodded at me, and I realized that everything would be different now. In the evening we arrived at my old house. Richard was there, as always, in an armchair with a newspaper. Haley was scrolling through the feed on her phone. Julianne greeted us with the same scenario, a smile, faint joy. What a surprise, children. Come on in, sit down. I looked at her and said, We have something you need to hear. Andrew took out his phone and pressed play. My mother's voice filled the room, confident, soft, and insidious. Every whisper, every sarcastic remark, it all sounded like she was reciting her inner monologue on stage. Richard paled. Haley froze. And Juliana. She froze. I saw fear in her eyes, not anger, not shame, but a real, paralyzing fear of being exposed. When the recording ended, there was silence, thick as in a flooded room. Richard got up first. He didn't scream. His voice was quiet, but it was trembling with years of accumulated fatigue. Did you marry me for the money? Julianne tried to say something, but he raised his hand. Don't. I've heard enough. I didn't need a recording to understand that everything you were building was a facade. But now you've shown it to everyone. He picked up his jacket from the armchair. I'm leaving. I'll find a lawyer tomorrow. And you, find your conscience. If she's still around. He left without turning around. The door slammed shut like a final chord. Haley was still sitting motionless. Her lips were trembling. Juliana sat down on the sofa, her eyes glazed, her breathing uneven. I stood up. Everything you've destroyed, everything you've tried to control, has turned against you. You have no power over me anymore. Not over my life, not over my future. She didn't answer. She just turned away, as if I were a draft. We left in silence. There was a wind outside. It tickled my face and reminded me of, I'm free. For the first time in real life. Avalon's plan worked. The truth came to light. And even though it burned, it cleansed. I felt the heaviness that had been dragging me all my life disappear. The weight of expectations, manipulation, and quiet hatred. I was no longer the daughter of someone else's ambitions. I was just me. And I had a life ahead of me where no one had the right to decide what was right for me. I never went back there. The house on Willow Lane remained on the map as a marker in the past, like a faded spot on an old film, unbearably familiar, but no longer having any power over me. After that evening, when the truth was spoken out loud, I felt as if I had finally escaped from a long dream where the shadows of the past endlessly whisper in your ear, dictating who you should be. Julianne was gone. She didn't die, no, but she seemed to have disappeared from all corners of my reality. The phone was silent. Social media is a void. No letter, no, sorry, postcard. It was as if, having lost control, she had also lost interest. Haley called. Once. Then another one. Then she wrote. Her messages were short, as if confused. Can we talk? I didn't know it was like that. You're still my sister. But I already knew that forgiveness is not always about reconciliation. Sometimes forgiveness is just allowing yourself to move on without looking back. I wasn't angry. I just didn't want to go back to the version of myself that apologized for other people's actions. Andrew and I canceled everything. All the plans, all the reservations, all the flower arrangements that I once saved in a folder called Wedding. I opened it, flipped through it, and felt the pages, one by one, lose their significance. We didn't need these scripts. I didn't need a white tent on a manicured lawn. I didn't need the consent of someone who thought I wasn't enough. All we needed was a road. Real. With dusty roadsides, the smell of gasoline, a radio that crackles in the desert, and stars above the hood at night. We left in early May. In an old van with worn seats and a sticky sticker on the back window. Without a navigator, with a paper map on which we put crosses and hearts, not as directions, but as reminders that all this is ours. The first was Sedona, then Page, then, as if by itself, the Grand Canyon. I stood on its edge and looked down at the crevices carved by time and wind, and thought, I guess I'd become like that too. The cracks in me didn't scare me anymore. They were my story. The music was playing in the background. Old acoustics, a bit of blues, a bit of folk. We sang, lost our way, argued about words, and laughed. In the morning we drank coffee from metal mugs, at noon we lost touch with the world, and in the evening we cooked pasta on a camping stove and watched the sky get darker and darker until only the stars remained. No one knew where we were. And it was perfect. Sometimes we stayed in small motels, with carpets that smelled of the past, and receptionists who always had a supply of stories. One such man in Arizona, with gray temples and a Texas accent, said, looking at us, "You have that look. The look when everything is just beginning." And he was right. A year later, we got married in Zion. Not in a hall, not in a restaurant, not in front of 100 guests, but on a cliff where the earth drops off into the sky, and the wind plays with your hair like an old friend. It was just us, a few close friends we'd met on the way, and the sun was setting right behind us. I was wearing a simple linen dress, and Andrew was wearing a white shirt and jeans. We didn't write vows, but each of our looks was a promise. Not loud, not pretentious. Simple. Present. After the ceremony, we ate berries from our palms, drank cold beer from cans, and listened to one of our friends play the guitar. No one toasted. No one raised a glass to the happy couple. But the whole world seemed to be drinking for us, in the air, in the rustle of leaves, in the flicker of sunset. It wasn't a life in spite of, it was a life for the sake of. For my own sake. For the sake of the light that we lit in each other. For the sake of silence, which finally had a place for my own voice. Andrew has become my home. Not because he saved me. Because he never demanded that I be anything other than myself. We built our lives not according to a plan, but according to intuition. Sometimes they were wrong. Sometimes they argued. But they always came back to each other, like gravity. Definitely. Softly. Every morning I woke up next to him and knew that I was in my life. Not in someone else's scenario. Not in the expectations of a mother, not in the envy of a sister, not in the fear of a little girl. I was a woman who chose herself. Sometimes I was still thinking about the past. Not with pain, but with surprise. How long have I lived, not knowing that it is possible otherwise? For a long time I was afraid to go beyond the threshold, beyond the boundaries that someone had drawn for me. And now I was standing on the edge of the cliff, holding his hand, and I knew I didn't need any more maps. Because wherever we go, it will be our route. Our horizon. And it will always be new.